This week on the Utini Show, we are talking all about our love of fantasy books, how we got into Brandon Sanderson, and what we want to read next, and what you should read if you want to make the jump from Star Wars books. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, enjoy the show. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Utini Show. We are Corey, Charles, and Eric. And that's it this week. We're missing our buddy Wes, but he is with us in spirit. Not really. He is playing softball and doing great. But the three of us are here to talk all about one of our most favorite recent hobbies. It is not the Miami Heat. We have done that already. It is instead fantasy books. It's not Charlotte FC, Charles. Charles is wearing a glorious Charlotte FC. It actually looks very comfortable. Is it as comfortable as it looks?
Yeah, you want to feel it?
Yeah, I do. Hold on. Give me a second.
You want to get in here with me?
You know what? I gotta be honest with you. All right, it's not as comfy as I thought.
You gotta need the mic. You gotta get the sound of the claw.
Ready? Here we go.
That's the wrong claw. There's so many gags. How did we not talk last week about the new mics?
Oh, yeah. We didn't.
We should address
Well,
that.
we didn't.
The best thing about that is I don't know which episode's coming out first.
I don't either.
But yeah,
We're gonna wing it.
we're doing handheld mics for a while.
Then how did we not talk next week about the new mics?
But next week, why did next week we talk about the new mics?
I don't know.
We record 2 episodes at a time. It's kind of unhinged.
Yes.
Because I travel for a living. Because I have to get paid money.
It helps a lot.
It does.
Travel, folks, you get paid more.
That's right. I'm a travel doctor. I have to travel to doctor. You know,
Travel to doctor.
travel to doctor.
That's something you're trying to lie in your taxes.
That's right.
I travel to doctor.
I'm a travel doctor. That sounds fake.
Yeah, it does absolutely
It's
sound fake. But
sounds
it's real.
That's right. Yeah. So we do 2 weeks here, and then I'm away for 2 weeks, and it's hard to record. So we do 2 in a row behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes.
But we're trying new mics this time. We found that the old mics were doing a good job, but it was kind of tough to keep.
We're holding them. So if you hear a lot of this,
Yeah, they pick up more sound.
if you hear that, that means that we're holding them.
I'm really glad that we are acknowledging the faults of the mic at the top of the show.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
So if you hear this, and by this I mean, then you just know that's because we're holding them.
All right.
But that also means that you can hear me if I talk like this. And I think that is the best part.
That's not a pro. That is a con. If we're being honest. Tell us if you hate the new mics.
Yeah. These
And,
comments below.
and if you hate them, we may choose to ignore that. But if you love them, we will take that in stride.
But if you hate them, know that they will also be used either last week or next week. So we will get to them in the next recording. We're so sorry.
What are we talking about?
Today we're talking about fantasy books, everybody.
Fantasy books.
So,
Fantasy books.
yes, one of the newest sessions in our friend group of our trio, as it were, is fantasy books. It started last year, and I do want to give full credit, as I think we've said previously on this show and the Living Force back in the day, to Charles.
Thank you. As I created the genre of fantasy. Thank you.
You did well done. I appreciate you very much. Charles R.R. Tolkien. Charles, I want to ask you this, because this legitimately did start with you last year. Why did you decide to go on a slight tangent from reading Star Wars books, which we did for years and years and years, and like the sci-fi genre? And what made you kind of expand to fantasy? Because none of us were reading fantasy books.
You basically destroyed Utini is what we're trying to say. So what? How did that happen, Charles?
Yeah.
Why?
You ready to go to a dark place?
I mean, Charles, I'm a millennial. It's 2024. I'm already there, baby.
I think that I got burnt out on reading very similar books back to back, and I said I need a little change of a pace. I still want to escape reality. I still want to read something.
We don't have time to read into all that, everybody. We're just going to talk about books now. We don't even have time for Charles's mental health. That's a Patreon exclusive.
That's more on that last
cry?
week or next week. I might cry.
You cry?
I cried at work today.
Did you?
That's a real thing, actually. Yeah.
Wow.
But that was
You should try not being weak.
with a patient. So
Are they?
Like I said, weak.
they're not okay. Anyways, fantasy.
That's a turn I was not expecting, everyone.
Fantasy.
Well, that's the YouTube short for the week. Back to fantasy, because life is hard.
I genuinely do love reading fantasy for escapism. That's a real thing.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
And I genuinely got burnt out on Star Wars, and we had a lot of very frank conversations about that off and on air in the old Living Force. And I said, I'm going to go to something else. And I don't actually recall why it was that I chose the book that I did. That I'm sure we're going to jump into and talk about here in a minute.
Go for it right now.
It was Mistborn.
Yes.
It was Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson.
Yep.
But I just recall picking it up and just having my mind blown, not just because it was not Star Wars, but because it was just phenomenal writing.
Good.
I mean, I could have picked up trash. I could have picked up a trash book.
Why did you pick that up? Do you know?
No, that's what I'm saying. I don't remember
Did
why.
somebody recommend it? It was on your phone?
At some point, yeah, I did not. I think it could have even been like not BookTok, but like the Instagram equivalent, because I don't have TikTok, of like top fantasy books. Like if you want to get into fantasy, and it was on there
because you had like just a regular old paperback, because that's what you that eventually would end up giving us to read.
Yes, and then I have enjoyed getting the paperbacks, and then if you really love it, get the like special edition hardback and then put it on the shelf. Right?
Oh, we'll
that's a whole thing. But you're the one that got me into getting those for Mistborn too. But anyways, that's how we got into it. And then shout out to my sister as well, who does not read fantasy at all, or did not, I should say. And around the same time I picked up Mistborn, she picked up the first book in the Sword of Truth series and read the entire series. And now I'm reading that also. And so she was part of it too, because I was like, she's really enjoying that, doesn't even like fantasy. Let me branch out a little bit, because I do like this stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I love that. And I think like, I think this is the part of the podcast where we say like, yes, we're going to be 3 dudes talking about how great Brandon Sanderson is. And this is not a new thing, but it is very new for us, which is odd, because I feel like when I read Mistborn, when you're like, hey guys, I've read this amazing book, you should try it out. And you would never recommended a book to us before. This is not a thing that had really happened. We hadn't read books outside of Star Wars ever before, really.
I think I read 2 genres of books for 3 years straight.
Same.
I read Star Wars and self-development. Literally, that was it.
Oh yeah, no, sorry, I only read Star Wars. I didn't read self-development.
Yeah, that's right. We know.
You read adult and YA.
There were so many.
We can tell.
There's so many because of the everything about me.
That's right.
But when you recommended Mistborn, it was like, okay,
it felt out of left field.
Yeah, and we were like, okay.
Honestly, I remember that. Like we were all.
Yeah, we're like, is he okay?
Yeah,
I
we're
mean,
like,
it was surprising. It was.
Yes, you were like, I'm reading this fantasy book. We're like, Charles is reading a fantasy book. That seems kind of weird.
Yeah, and we told us to give it a shot. We're like, okay. And I remember reading it. And
we had that random night. It was after a Living Force episode. We were talking about books, and we talked about we talked about we talked about the gangster book. What was it?
It's literally called Gangster.
Okay,
you do this every time.
Gangster.
You loved it so much, but it doesn't stick.
It is called Gangster, and it is by definition.
It's by Lorenzo Carcaterra, if anyone's wondering.
It's and I read that. I read that book.
Yes.
You also had a pirate book that was one of your favorites.
What?
It's called the pirate book. I swear to God.
No. Captain Blood.
Old school.
One of my favorite books of all time.
It was that night.
But I don't know if it was that book that I told you about, or if it was about that. Shoot, I'm blanking. Who wrote Redwall series?
Brian Jakes.
Brian Jakes. Yeah,
he wrote a book that was like the Flying Dutchman. Or something.
It was Curse the Flying Dutchman. Yeah,
that book's fire.
It's so good. Yeah. Redwall is amazing. Also, did you read Trust of the Emerald Sea yet? Did we talk about that?
No, it's on my bookshelf.
Okay, cool.
I haven't read it yet.
It was that night. We all got on this, and I wrote down all the books that you recommended. I've read 2 out of 3. So
yeah, and I was like,
so far they're hitting,
and we were like, okay, cool. Like Charles will do, and you. I remember like you gave me Mistborn physically, and this is a year and a half ago or so. Everyone, if you're not in our friendship circle, I haven't followed the Sanderson channel on Discord. Since you did that, Charles, you guys know this. I have read all of Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere in the last year plus, which includes all of the Mistborn eras 1 and 2, Elantris, Warbreaker, the entirety of the Stormlight Archive, and all the novellas.
That is so.
It is thousands of pages because it is literally my favorite literature now that I've ever read in my entire life. And
I know it's a cliche at this point, but Brandon Sanderson genuinely is one of the greatest authors of our generation.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And I think you made a great point, Charles, as to why it hits so hard for us, because for years we read every Star Wars book, and one of the big selling points I think that we told our listeners, that if you followed us in the old show, like, was that the great part about Star Wars books is that you have a lot of prior knowledge that you don't need to then retread in a new book, which is exciting. You can come in with, the universe, a lot of the characters, and there's not a lot of work. And especially in like the COVID times, the times where we're all pretty stressed, that was kind of nice to be like, okay, I know a little bit. I don't have to work as hard.
Yeah.
But when you open Mistborn, and the first line is like, Ash, Mistborn.
When you open
Mistborn, my Brandon Sanderson. It's the first line is like, I won't do it again. It's like, Ash fell from the sky is the first line of Mistborn. And you're like, what in the world is this? And it is a whole world, and we got to experience a new world for the first time together in years.
I know.
It was incredible.
Yeah, I totally agree. I followed you not that long afterwards. I read Mistborn in, I think, December of 22, I want to say, because I was in Arizona doing the travel doctor work out there.
Yeah.
And I picked up Mistborn about that time, and I just banked them all back to back. And I just finished the third book of the Stormlight Archive series.
As of recording this.
Yeah, about
it's Springer.
I don't know, 2 weeks ago, something like that, 3 weeks ago, and yeah, I get it. I mean, I get it. Like it's almost a cliche. You've seen those. I don't know if you guys have you seen the TikTok where it's like if you ask a man their favorite book, it's one of these, and it's like it's Fellowship of the Ring, or it's Mistborn, or it's
Wave Kings, or Words of Radiance,
or Dune,
Yep,
those are the 3 books.
Yep.
Yes. Ask your white man boyfriend what his favorite books are. He's going to say one of these, and I understand it's a cliche, and maybe it is, or maybe I just live in a bubble because of social media. But
here they are.
I get it now.
Yeah.
I get it now. It's like being a fan of Avengers Endgame. Like
it's great.
It's great. Just accept it. You know what I mean?
And it's so weird because for me, what I didn't expect with Sanderson, I expected to like these books you recommended, Charles, because you're like, this is good and I trust your taste, and I'm like, this is very good. I didn't expect to fall so hard into his writing style, and then after I was done with Cosmere, to then truly fall in love again with reading. Like I realize now in retrospect, if there wasn't a new Star Wars book, I didn't have a book on my nightstand. I didn't have an audiobook going.
Yeah.
And now I always have a book at all times. And that changed for me.
It's generally opened my eyes to the fantasy genre, honestly, because like I had read Fellowship years ago, and I reread it about 2 years ago. And like, that's for a long time, it's been like the gold standard of fantasy books. It seems like even I'm outside of the circle. Like, I'm a noob. I'm sure people that are like me, big fans of the fantasy genre, are like rolling their eyes at this. Right. But I think from the outside looking in, to someone who doesn't know anything about fantasy genre, like Lord of the Rings is kind of the gold standard, I think, from the outside looking in.
I couldn't get through Fellowship.
Yeah, I know, and I think that's a common.
I couldn't get out of this.
It's a common trope. I think it is. I think it's a tough read. It's a tough read.
The movies are perfect.
It's a very academic.
It's hard to read if you've watched the movie.
That's right.
I think that's
right.
Get to Weathertop. Where are the Nazgul?
And Tom Bombadil starts rolling in.
Yes. I'm not going to sit here. I'm not going to. Listen. We are not.
The thing that's wrong with Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah, we should just stop that.
No, there's still. I think there's still good books.
I think there's a huge community around that, and I think that because we don't know jack about it, like we are missing out on it in a lot of ways. But
absolutely on that.
But I was not willing to make that investment. You know what I mean? Into the genre.
Yes. Yeah, right.
And Brandon Sanderson has a level of accessibility to the genre that I now feel like I can pick up something else.
Well, and this is no hate at all. Again, love Lord of the Rings. There's a lot of deep stuff with Tolkien in general, where like,
absolutely.
you're like, I'm sorry, where were the elves? And like, what is this other, like,
it's
there's
very complex.
So many, it's actually very, very deep, very, very complex. I don't understand any of it. Why didn't the Eagles help from the beginning? I don't know, but a lot of people out there do, and there's a reason.
We're not going there. Comments.
But no, the point being that, it is actually less accessible because it is more complex. There is a whole fandom behind it that feels like it's been there for ages, right? Something newer.
For the first age, the second age, the third age.
The third, did you ever play a video game?
The third age.
I didn't. No, I didn't. I know it's great.
Was fun.
That game rocked. I had a lot of
did play the Lord of the Rings games on the PlayStation 2 back in the day.
Unbelievably good.
Unbelievable. Return of the King.
Play as Gandalf, the most OP character in the history of video games with that shield.
Hated playing as the Hobbits, though.
Me too, because like sneak around. I'm like, no.
Everybody did. I remember there was the level outside of the Black Gate.
Yeah,
just like wave into wave team, and that was how you could like level up everybody. Because
dude, I played as Legolas, and you get fire arrows, and then you get the mithril arrows that go through people.
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful.
That game's rocked.
That was quite the tangent. Anyway, Charles.
Well, I think we were just talking about accessibility. So Sanderson feels more accessible, even though we were all very late to the party. Like,
very late.
Put out so many books,
which is exciting because we had so much to read.
Yeah, it's not as in like pop culture, and it doesn't have the same history behind it. So it feels like you can discover it. Does that make sense? And so there's an excitement level to that. Like when you go into something like Fellowship now in 2024, you go in with the expectation of having seen the movies, the expectation of knowing like some of the fandom that's behind this and all that.
Yeah.
That's not really there unless you have friends that tell you about Sanderson. So
yeah, when I started reading Mistborn, I texted you all the time. No, because I knew you had read them, and I am very anti-spoiler. I'm like, I want to experience the things that's happened. So anytime I needed to know, like, oh, is this character this person or this going, I text Charles. And then when I started reading Stormlight Archive, I read that before you guys. I had a buddy named Derek. I don't think you're watching this, but you're the best. My buddy Derek had read Stormlight. I think he's read the full Stormlight Archive 3 times. And anytime I needed something, I would text him and be like, bro, who is this person? What is this character portrait like? Because I didn't want to Google anything. Because, when you Google a character name and Google suggests, oh, death?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's like,
and I'm like, no. But he was
Qui-Gon's funeral pyre?
Yeah.
Is that what you meant?
Oh, you mean on the soundtrack? But like I had this guy, and I'm like, he was so great to walk me through and help me be like, oh yeah, this is that person, this is that herald's name, this is what they look like. And it was so interesting because the fantasy genre in 2024 is so different than it's been before, because there was such a great cohesive community that very much in our Utenian ethos is like, hey, you want to get into this thing? There are so many people that have loved this for years that are so thrilled for you to join it. Like in our Discord now, I have seen so many people start Sanderson, so much that we literally have a Sanderson only channel that people have read and have gone through their Mistborn journey, then they ready to launch us, and then they read Stormlight Archive. Like that, everyone in that channel is so thrilled to answer questions and do things, because Sanderson's mythology, half of it's in the books, but half of it's in just what he said at conventions and what is theorized. And like, it was so interesting you bringing this into our friend group, because I'm like, oh my God, there are things outside Star Wars that have this level of mythology that I can fall in love with. And frankly, writing and dialogue and action that is so well crafted that I can picture in a way that sometimes I've missed in certain Star Wars books, or sometimes that I've only thought I could find in certain books. Like the audiobook narrators are incredible. The visualizations, the creatures, everything is so top tier that I fell back in love with reading before bed, something that I used to think of as a chore.
Here's a question for you. For those that are not watching, for those that are only listening, Eric's sitting here wearing a House of the Dragon t-shirt.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about Game of Thrones for a minute.
Let's do it.
Because that obviously huge pop culture.
Change the world.
Whole set of books.
Probably the biggest intro into fantasy in
our generation.
Maybe history.
Easy.
Yeah. Did you read the books, or did you watch the show, or did you do both?
So I watched the show when it came out.
What was that statistic that you said earlier?
So in the first season of Game of Thrones, there was 2.5 million viewers per episode. In the final season of Game of Thrones, there were 12 million, which is roughly the same as the NBA Finals last year. That's how big it got.
That's great.
I did get the first book as I was watching the show, and this was back when I was in college, and I started it, but I had that issue where you're talking about if you've seen the movies, it's hard to read Fellowship. Mm-hmm. Since I watched the show, it was hard for me to read the book.
That's what I was curious.
Because I was like, I know what happens. And that is my issue. Like, I have a really hard time going from movie back to book, because books take more time. They're more dense, which is great. I mean, George R. R. Martin's writing style is very, very good. But I did bounce off of Game of Thrones because I was like, I know what happens already. I'm just going to wait for the next season. Right. And I know that people that went from the books to the show had a wonderful time, because you get to see the visualization of things you already knew. And I think if Sanderson eventually comes to visual media, which it's wild to think that he hasn't, honestly, at this point, I think we will have the better time of realizing the visualization of things that we love. But yeah, I couldn't go back, even with the newest book that, even with Fire and Blood, even anything like that, I haven't been able to go back to Westeros, oddly enough.
So do you think that if you picked up those books first, never watched the show, do you think you could have had the same experience that you're having with Sanderson?
It's a great question, and I think it's possible, but I also wonder a couple things. Because I'm 32 now, right? So I started reading the Cosmere.
Jeez.
Can you believe that?
I will just shove you so hard into oncoming traffic.
The oldest member of this podcast is not here right now,
I
which
know,
makes
Wes.
you the oldest member of this podcast.
So when I started reading Sanderson,
did you take your cholesterol pill this morning?
I didn't. You got to bring me a new script, brother. So
I don't do that, just for the record.
That's true. I do.
I don't.
So I started reading Sanderson in my 30s, and I was like, oh, I wonder if I had been like 22. Because like Way of Kings came out, I think, in 2010, 2011, when I was in college. I had friends I knew were reading him at that point when it first came out. And I'm like, oh man, if I had started then as a younger man, what would it have been like? Like, I wasn't a really avid reader. I hadn't read just the pure amount of words that I had by the time I got to Mistborn. Would that have been possible? You know? And I want to say yes. And with Game of Thrones, maybe it could have been the same. You know, maybe I could have, because Game of Thrones is a little more dense. You know what I mean? And I wonder nowadays, since fantasy is now more in the modern scope, like I bought the Mistborn trilogy for my cousin Jared for Christmas last year. He's 21. And I was like, hey man, here you go. I wish I had read this at your age, because I'm excited for your decade. Because I feel like I missed out on a decade of fantasy books, I feel, earnestly.
Yeah.
Like I missed out on Joe Abercrombie. I missed out on Robin Hobb. I missed out on Brandon Sanderson. Like, there's so many books that I have on my shelf now that I'm like, I could have spent my 20s doing this. So, like, do you guys think that if you had started in your 20s, you would have been a more avid fantasy reader? Or do you think it's good that you waited till your late 20s?
I mean, I'll be honest. The reason I started reading fantasy was because I had a little small community that was also reading it, and I trusted.
Sure, right. You didn't have the community at that time.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. I picked up Star Wars on my own, like those books, and I always read them on my own. I didn't even know other people read Star Wars books, you know what I mean? Which is crazy to think about. But like I just did that kind of in a vacuum for a decade, basically. And so I don't know. I mean, I probably wouldn't have picked them up. There's something, it feels like a big mountain to climb. Fantasy books does.
Yeah.
It feels like a big barrier to entry, I guess. And I don't know if I would have picked them up ever, frankly.
There is a weird idea that you have to like prove yourself to fantasy. That it's like that.
It's gonna be work.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like, you feel like it's gonna be intense
which is such a ridiculous. Because once you're in it, like the authors are doing a great job. And I had this
also.
moment,
We should to say that like good writing doesn't make it feel like that.
No,
like
that's the whole point.
Yeah, like it's you pick it up casually, just like you're reading anything else.
Yeah.
Also like character glossaries, big win.
Yeah,
big win.
Wait, for sure.
Well,
for sure. And like not everything feels like Fellowship when you pick it up.
No,
you know what I mean, like you pick up a Sanderson book and you feel like you're starting a D&D adventure.
Yeah,
like you start riding the action.
Yeah. You fall in love with Vin and Kelsier's introduction. I'm like, who is this dude?
Listen, I convinced Caitlin to read these books, and she's never read a fantasy book before this. And I was like, Caitlin, it'll take you 3 chapters to understand the entire lore.
Yep.
That's all you need.
Yep.
In 3 chapters. And I'm like, that's it. Then you're in. Now you're in.
Yep.
You can follow everything. I'm like, that's what good writing does. And like,
his magic and his world are so clear. And I think that's what we started to realize that we bumped off of occasionally with Star Wars. Like our biggest critique with the larger universe has been there's a lot of voices that don't sometimes seem consistent, that there sometimes seems to be not a plan for certain things. And in fantasy genres, like with Sanderson, with things like that, like one person is guiding the way.
Yeah.
Usually. And they clearly know what's going on. And I had this experience recently, these last couple of weeks. I started reading the Court of Thorn and Roses books by Sarah J. Maas.
Hugely popular. Right
hugely popular.
Caitlin has read all of them.
And they've told me, and I feel like I've been pitched to them as like they're for girls, they're romantasy.
Yeah.
Like romance books. And
do you know about these, Charles?
Yeah, I'm familiar with them.
Yeah.
I'm familiar.
I'm in the second book right now. They are so fun. And I feel like there's been this idea where either because they star a young girl or so does Sanderson, but maybe they're written by a woman and there happens to be a little bit of romance, like that they're lesser than, but man, there's such a great fantasy world in them. And I feel like I'm learning there's all these talks online and in the other places about like why you shouldn't read this, why this is lesser than this. And I'm like, man, there are so many great worlds and so many great writers that are out there right now that I've just ignored for so many years. And I feel silly about it because I'm having a wonderful time.
I do too. I think you just kind of get set in your ways. And I think some of it is I think we have to say too that like I wish I could go back and like rediscover Star Wars books because it was
very special.
It was such a huge universe and like it was such a unknown and like, you know, you read 2 or 3 of the greats when you're first getting started and you're like, wow, holy smokes. This is like, you know, for a lot of people, for our generation, it's like, this is Harry Potter with the books never end.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, That's how it felt like in our early journey.
When you read that main trilogy and you're like, what?
Yes.
This is real?
Read Bane and Thrawn and you know, a lot of the original trilogies and like, you're like, this is just phenomenal writing and I love it. And it's expanding on the movies and this is so cool. And like, but I think you do eventually get to a point where like you've just read so much that it becomes like a routine a little bit. It's not necessarily a negative experience. It's just like a neutral experience.
Yeah, it's like, oh, here's the next one.
We just know so much that like how many times can we talk about how a Jedi feels the Force?
Yes.
You know?
That's the example that we come up with a bunch of times. Yeah. And what you have to keep in mind is for someone reading that book and reading that explanation for the first time, it is exciting.
It is magical for that person. And
So,
like
Absolutely.
that's what I'm saying is like it doesn't like you have to understand that you're kind of meeting the writing where you are a little bit. And like, I think that, you know, after you've totally just spent so much time in a universe, it does become like you're used to it at that point.
And I think that's what's been
that
so
doesn't
fun.
make it bad.
No.
That's something that I'm really trying to make clear.
It's
more
different.
It's more about you than it is about the
That's right.
book or the story itself.
like we have sort of matured with Star Wars books in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I think that's what makes it so fun about like when we discovered Sanderson is like, once you read Mistborn, it takes place on the planet Scadrial, and there's a certain magic system. And then Sanderson writes that. But then you go to read The Way of Kings in the Stormlight Archive, and that's a new planet. It's a new magic system.
Yeah.
Same guy.
Does Mistborn even talk about the planet that it's on? I don't think it even does.
No, I didn't realize it was planets.
Right.
Planets?
Exactly.
Oh, baby. Yes, there's a whole thing. Read Mistborn, Eric.
Eric knows the lore, guys.
I love the Cosmere, baby. Stay tuned on the YouTube channel.
I don't know the lore that
but like,
I don't know anything.
But I think what we realize, like, there's so many books and so many like shows and creative things that are tied to the skill of the person making them. And that's what we've realized, like, it's not just that it's a Star Wars book or it's a fantasy book.
Right.
We're finding great creators. And some of the great creators, everybody, are creating a new Star Wars TV show called The Acolyte. And you can hear all about that on Bounty Hunt, the Utini podcast that is coming back after their amazing coverage of season 3 of The Bad Batch. Bounty Hunt will be back talking about The Acolyte the day after release. That's right. There's a 2-episode release of The Acolyte on June 4th. We cannot wait for this new show about the High Republic and all the Jedi and Darkseid users within it. The same host will be back breaking down every episode, breaking down Easter eggs, breaking down theories, and you'll see some people from the Utini staff on there as well. Be sure to subscribe to Bounty Hunt on any podcast catcher of your choice, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podcatcher, wherever you want. We will be here every week talking about The Acolyte and celebrating with you. Again, make sure that you subscribe to that in your podcatcher of choice and go to the Discord channel, The Acolyte, to talk about all good things. Again, thank you to Bounty Hunt so much for sponsoring this episode. Now back to our talk about Sanderson and fantasy.
Always impressive, Eric, I have to say.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Redo it.
I absolutely hold on.
I was like, that wasn't good enough for me.
But I think one of the fun things for me, too, that we haven't touched on really too much of the conversation yet about fantasy has been the fantasy side of social media. Like we talked about, like you said, like you discovered Mistborn maybe through like Instagram or whatever. Mm-hmm. But like BookTok is such a thing that's talked about nowadays. Like there's signs in Barnes and Noble, or like BookTok love this. That's why romance fantasy, like Fourth Wing and things have gotten big. But like BookTok has been so fascinating for me as someone who started reading Sanderson to be like, okay, what else is out there? And now the same kind of books, like Joe Abercrombie's trilogies start coming up. The Sword of Kayan starts coming up. And I've started to build a reading list based on this community that I never knew existed before. And it honestly feels like finding Utini for the first time. It feels like finding a Star Wars community to be like, wait, there's people that are individually reading the same fantasy books year by year, and it's starting to really affect the whole industry. It's incredible.
I mean, our web analytics go up every month. You know, it's not huge jumps, but it's small amounts every single month. Like more and more people are discovering new genres and new, you know, sub-communities. And like, I think that's true. I mean, and I think that's really cool. I mean, reading has come back, I think, in a huge way. And maybe it's our social circle and the bubble we live in a little bit.
No, I mean,
like,
Barnes and Noble is opening stores.
Really?
Yeah.
That's impressive.
For the first time in like a decade, last year, they started opening more stores. We got a new store around me.
Barnes and Noble
2 weeks ago
is one of my favorite places to just go.
I love going.
Speak on it.
Just being in, it smells of Starbucks because they all
have Starbucks now.
It does have a smell.
It has a smell.
You think they pump that you think they pump that smell?
You think they make a candle out of that?
Probably.
I mean, probably.
You can buy a Delta Sky Lounge candle. It's a real thing.
That's the richest thing you've ever said.
There's a smell in the Delta Lounge, and once you smell it, you're like, all right, this is the Delta Lounge.
It just smells like crisp bills.
It's like money.
You can buy it online. You can buy it online.
Yeah.
It's called the Ben Franklin candle. I'm just kidding.
No, you're right though. Like I love, even if I'm not going to buy anything, I love going in a Barnes and Noble and just like
it's got a vibe
seeing
on
the books.
on a rainy day, especially.
Dude.
That's an absolute vibe.
Dude, going in.
Dude, I want to go right now.
I want to go right now.
It's one of my favorite
You just
places.
want to leave? Let's just stop the show.
Let's go to Barnes and Noble at
All right, guys, this is a good show.
PM.
We'll be back.
But it's really fun because you go in and for me, what I've done the last year and a half, because the Barnes and Noble like 5 minutes from my house, and I'll go in and I'll find the books that I see on BookTok. I'll read the first couple pages,
And then I'll go home and buy it off Amazon.
Don't lie.
why are you gonna out me like that?
Oh, listen, we know that we all do it. All right, we can't.
We
even
try.
lie.
Barnes and Noble's not an indie publisher, but I don't feel that bad. But no, but like,
true.
there is an idea of like they really do a great job of being like, these books are popular. These books are being talked about. Like, here they are. Check them out. Give it a shot. And there is an element of like,
I discovered Star Wars books in a Barnes and Noble. That's
right.
That's part of my origin.
That's right. You did.
Yes, I did. I accidentally stumbled on a shelf full of Star Wars books when I was like 12 or 13 or something like that. I was like, holy crap, there's like Star Wars books? What the hell is this? Like, yeah. I mean, I get it. Bookstores they've changed a lot over time.
They've adapted.
That's right. Is Books A Million still a thing?
It is. They have one in the mall where I go to see movies sometimes.
Interesting.
It's huge.
Barnes and Noble, Books A Million. What else is
Borders?
there?
Oh, no. Borders is gone.
Is Borders
That's
gone?
gone?
Borders was my favorite as a kid, dude. I would get the Calvin and Hobbes comics from Borders.
Wow.
That's all I got.
Yeah. Charles, I got a question for you.
Yes.
Because you picked up fantasy because you were a little tired of Star Wars books, want something new.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you picked up fantasy because it's so adjacent to sci-fi? Or like, could you just as easily picked up like literary fiction, historical fiction, like not like
True crime.
what? Yeah, true
No,
crime. Like,
no,
what was it about
sorry.
fantasy that made that the natural move from Star Wars?
So I've gone through a lot of phases with reading just in general throughout my life, not just since like we picked up fantasy, but like when I'm into a genre. Dude,
Wishbone?
I'm so sorry. I activated you like the Winter Soldier there. I saw that happen.
Did you see it? I was just a happier, younger version of myself.
Charles's pupils is beginning
Listen,
You're teleported.
let me tell you something.
Let me ask you: Was he in the Robin Hood outfit?
No. Let me tell you something. But I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, you do.
Wishbone was one of my favorite things in the world. My childhood stuffed animal that was like my best friend was Wishbone. Like literally a stuffed Wishbone from the show Wishbone.
What?
Wow. Yes. Wishbone is like one of my. I've gone back on YouTube and watched old Wishbone episodes when I'm just old and sad.
Ladies and gentlemen watching the show, sometimes you just nail it. You know what I mean? Sometimes you just don't even know. Sniper shot.
What are we talking about?
Why did you choose fantasy from sci-fi? Why did you go to fantasy? So
I've read a lot of different genres, and I tend to go through phases. Like you mentioned, like true crime. I read a lot of that and like mob stuff.
Gangster books, such as what was that gangster book?
It's on the tip of my pen. So like those kind of things, I go through phases. But fantasy from sci-fi is a pretty easy jump because, like you mentioned, like historical fiction or whatever it is, and yes, it still has like the fictional aspect and it can be fun and it can go anywhere, but it's set in your own world and there's like some understanding of how things are going to go, and there's literally no magic, but for that reason it feels like there's no magic because it feels like you're restrained. You're like, listen, if I want to read about what it's like to drive to work, I just lived it. Okay. I don't need to read about that.
If I
want to read about jumping to hyperspace in the Millennium Falcon, like, let's do that. I'd rather.
I absolutely want that. Yeah.
So I mean, it's still the escapism thing that I mentioned at the beginning, but it's also just like that curiosity because I'm reading a book also to like go on an adventure, and to me, those are like the most fantastic things are those types of genres.
Escapism. We've talked a lot about that. Escapism. I think that is one of the most important parts of. And honestly, there's some deeper psychology with that, I'm sure. I mean, I think it has to do with like the concept of play and imagination and like, you kind of return to the mind's eye of a child in a lot of ways. And I think that is like cathartic. For some,
and like the good guys win and the bad guys lose. Like, there is something ultimately.
There's a craving for that.
Yeah. Like when you're a kid, you want to slay dragons. You want to, like my nephew is just over a year old, and for his birthday, I got him a bunch of books, and I got him like the Dragon Slayers Academy books. I'm like, I want you to slay dragons. I also got him Aragon to read when he's older. And I'm like, I want you to be able to be a hero. And like, there's something just so quintessential about fantasy being like, there are mystical creatures and magic in the world, but none of them are as magical as you, as the protagonist, as the person that is there to save the world. And it's eternal. Like, no matter what I'm reading, I love the Chosen One trope. It's why we love Anakin Skywalker. It's why we love all that stuff. But fantasy is that with a world like Mistborn that's like, wait, but they can kind of fly. And they
fly now?
They fly now?
Yeah. I love how accessible it is nowadays, too. Like, I mean, we live in an age where, like, if you have a digital device, like a Kindle, or even just like your phone, I mean, like, if you want to read a book, you just buy it and read it immediately. I mean, I love that. I mean, I'm pretty much digital only these days.
Do an Audible trial, utini.com/Audible. There you go,
That's
Mistborn.
true. Get a free book.
Final Empire, technically.
I can do that. It says get a free Star Wars book. That's a lie. It's just an option.
Any book, get the Final Empire. It's better than any Star Wars book.
Is it?
Better than any.
Any? I don't know if I'd say any.
I might say any.
I don't know.
Lost Stars is the only one you'd probably put above it.
I might put the Darth Bane trilogy above the first book.
So here's the thing, everybody. I've been trying to save for a Brandon Sanderson tattoo / talk to people on Instagram about giving me a Brandon Sanderson tattoo. Hit me up on Instagram DMs if you want to give me a Brandon Sanderson tattoo. But like Mistborn,
I mean, I can hit you up on Instagram. I'll do it for the right price. I mean,
you would have to pay me, my guy. But like it is so interesting to. I'll tell you this: why I think Mistborn at this point for me, I put it above Star Wars books, but why I specifically put it at that level for me emotionally is like I felt the way reading the Final Empire, reading Hero of Ages more specifically, which is the third book in the trilogy, one of the maybe the best trilogy I've ever read in my life. I felt reading that the way that I felt seeing A New Hope, seeing The Force Awakens as an adult, being like, oh my God, we've just been in the universe for so long. I think it's hard to do a direct comparison because like it's true. It's not a fair comparison.
Like,
literally,
I don't know what I felt the first books I read, and
you did feel it. You didn't have emotions.
That's right.
You just got those like 2 years ago.
It did not compute.
Yeah,
that's right. I was not done with that. You know, it was pumped into my memory, but
there you go.
It was just part of the
programming.
It was part of the essence transfer.
That's part of the essence transfer. That's right.
God,
but I mean, I went back and listened to the Bane trilogy like 2 years ago, and I was building that.
When you're painting, right?
Yeah, I was painting and building that camper trailer. You can find it on DIYcargotrailer.com.
There you go. Keep it pumping. Keep it pumping.
I built that camper and then sold it immediately. Anyway, yeah, I went back and re-listened to that. I'm like, man, I don't remember any of this. I can't remember what that was like to experience that for the first time. So I think that is really what we're actually talking about is not even just fantasy books in general. It's almost like discovering a new genre of fandom. Mm-hmm. There's something to be said for that.
That's also very good.
Yeah, I mean, it can be a TV show. It can be a set of movies. It's literally.
What is it actually? If we're talking about it, it's actually just like a chemical rush in your brain.
Yeah,
we're really getting down to it. Like, I mean, I felt a lot of that with like getting into basketball this year.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I watched some of my first games with you guys, and I feel like I finally understand it. Where there's like a moment where it clicks, and you understand, the player, and you're like, this is a rush.
Yeah, and there's a future to it. Like
future to it. Yeah,
there's playoffs. There's the next year. Like Sanderson.
It feels like that.
Yeah.
I remember learning about Sanderson through his Kickstarter.
Yeah.
How have we not talked about that yet?
Oh, yeah. The most successful Kickstarter in the history of the world.
I remember that happened right in the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah,
right?
before any of us read him.
Yeah, that took us out of. I remember that when that happened. We might have even talked about the Living Force.
I think we did. We were like, are we going to do this? I don't know. Because none of us did. Now I'm like,
yeah. Do you guys know about this? I'd never heard of this guy really.
Yeah.
And like, I remember talking about that actually. And like you discover something new and you dive in for the first time and it's like a huge rush. And I don't know. You always wish you could re-experience something over again for the first time.
Mm-hmm. But I think the one thing that Sanderson does really well right now, and why I think it hit me especially, is that I read Mistborn and then I read all the Cosmere. I got all caught up, and I'm like, okay. And usually, all caused
up on a Tuesday.
I'm not going to give you that one. But usually, as a nerd, you hit your point where like, okay, I've read all the stuff that's coming out, and then other stuff will come out, and maybe it matters, maybe it doesn't. We'll find out. Sanderson's Cosmere has a plan, and he is very vocal about his plan. He's
Yeah,
like, I know
is-
where it's going for the next 20 years of
That
my
is
life.
very interesting, actually, that you bring
You
that
know?
up, because you have sent me some of those videos, and I didn't realize that was like a thing until
Yeah.
fairly recently. That he does these like vlogs. Have you seen any of these? Have you ever heard of this, Charles? Like
His weekly updates on his YouTube channel.
his weekly episodes on the YouTube channel. He like talks about. He has a little graphic that pops up. He's like, "This week I accomplished." He does a little dance,
Yep.
like, da-da-da-da.
Ding!
And it shows this little thing in the graphic.
A
It's like-
percentage amount of the book.
and it's like 38%. He goes 42.
Yep.
Every single week he does that.
Yeah.
He's like, this is how much of this next book that I have worked on this week.
Yep.
And he's talked a lot about his like experience with the writing community too. That like he like does it every single day for a certain amount of time, and no matter what, even if he doesn't want to, like he treats it like a real thing. And
Yeah.
it's very interesting to see that level of communication and engagement with his fans and community, which is
Yeah.
very unheard of.
Yeah.
Like
See people like George R. R. Martin that have had a book coming out for a decade. Patrick Rothfuss, like,
and it's hard not to be upset as a fan.
yeah,
To that.
we're waiting for
I know.
something.
It's hard not to be upset as a fan. Yes, they don't owe us anything, and
No,
yes,
they're people.
It is an entitlement, and yes, they are people, and yes, it is an art and all this type of thing. But like, yes, they are people. I guess,
But
but still,
something.
you say you're going to do something, and it hurts. It's hard. It's like if Disney was like, yeah, we're going to make a Star Wars movie eventually, and that's all you ever get. You know what I mean? That's frustrating.
Like, we've had a lot of Star Wars movies and projects canceled,
I know.
and we're like, we don't know where
It
the
sucks.
saga's going, and it's infinite. And Sanderson's like, well, Stormlight's going to be 10 books, and the 5th book, which is the end of the first arc, is coming out this December. Here's a percentage that I'm at with it. After that, I will go to the Mistborn, which will be the next era, which will be called the Ghostbloods. This will be probably coming out in 2026, 2027. Here you go. Like,
it's a level of transparency that like I don't, I've never really seen before, I guess, with
it's
any
incredible.
fandom. And like, they had that whole incident recently where the what's the conference in the
Dragonsteel Nexus.
Yes.
ACC.
Huh?
Sorry.
Oh, if only.
they phoned it.
Yep.
Yes, there's the big
That's coming later.
Yeah, that was Sanderson.
His convention.
The convention. Yeah, not conference. What am I saying? Convention in the fall, right?
Mhm.
And they had some issue where they undersold tickets, and it was like clogged, and the
Site crashed.
site crashed, and they wanted to sell a lot more tickets. And he was like, he had this whole explanation. You sent me that video.
Yeah.
I was like, holy smokes!
Yeah.
This is like a textbook case study in PR.
Yeah, he literally gave away some of his personal tickets to fans that couldn't refund their flights. And it is now a community of fantasy books, which have historically been people writing about mystical worlds and going to conventions to sign books, book signing, something like that. And now it is the 21st century of, I'm going to be on YouTube, and I'm going to be I'm going to talk to my fans, and I'm going to let you know what's going on. And it is now the evolution of that, which has now allowed fans to be way more invested, so they buy more books, so he does more work, so they're more invested. And it's so interesting to see a fandom growing out of something that, again, all happened for us from Charles being like, this book's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's been really cool.
All that to be said, we love Star Wars books. I think we're going to keep reading Star Wars books.
Absolutely.
And other books.
I'm reading The Living Force right now. Actually,
Yeah.
it's really good. I'm enjoying it a lot.
It's quite good.
We have matured with that fandom. I think it's healthy to say, there's other stuff that you like.
Yeah.
Get out there and try other stuff. Maybe try a genre that you've never tried before.
Yeah.
And, the crossover between sci-fi and fantasy is probably not that deep and not that hard to make.
Not at all.
You take authors like Sanderson that make it really easy, and it's been a fun journey.
Trust your friends. They've
Yeah.
Charles also recommended the Lycanius trilogy to me, which I've been reading. I read the first 2 books.
Honestly, for me, bar for bar with Mistborn. It's actually that good.
To go with our, let's see, previous or next episode about talking to your friends more. I have had reasons to text Charles just about these books, to be like, hey man, here's where I am, and
It's fun.
it has been so fun to also just talk to you straight up. I'll be like, hey man, I'm reading this book you recommended to me. This is pretty cool. Let's talk about these characters. Let's talk about this moment. And anything you can find, the older you get, that connects you to your guys, connects you to your friends, is also so special. And it has made that reading experience all the more special to be like, hey, we get to share in this amazing thing together. That, yes, is great on its own merit.
Yeah,
Absolutely. But it's all the more special because we get to share it.
I totally agree.
I love it. Listen, everybody, as we wrap up here, we're not going to give you anything revolutionary. Brandon Sanderson is very good. If you haven't read any Brandon Sanderson yet, read Mistborn. The Final Empire. That's the first book. I got my mom on. I don't tell you guys. My mom read it. Loved it.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I got her on it. She's reading The Wall of Ascension right now. Which is the second book.
And I got my sister into it. She read it as well.
No way.
Yeah.
Nice. It's good.
Keep spreading the word. It's very fun. Their books are absolutely excellent. If you followed us for any of our thoughts about Star Wars books, 3 for 3. We all agree.
Agreed.
It's incredible. And honestly, just getting to be back in the habit of reading, period, is a great time. And I think diversifying your portfolio is something we definitely encourage.
I like that.
But not too much. Just from sci-fi to fantasy.
Exactly. Don't be reading true crime. Don't read that. What's that book that it's about gangsters?
I can't remember.
I don't know.
We'll get back to you.
Anyway, until we figure out the name of that book, everybody, we love you. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode. We will be talking more about Sanderson, I'm sure, in the year to come, especially with Wind and Truth coming out later this winter. Until then, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. We will be back next week with something that we've already recorded or might record later. We'll really have to figure that out. But until then, thank you so much for watching the show. And as always, may the Force be with you.